One.
Hi there, this is Tiffany Barton. I have a new idea for you today to integrate into your classroom, and that is infographics and how you can use those in your classroom. I don't know about you, but I'm always looking for alternative assessments and new ways to engage my kids with information. I'm an English teacher, and so we do a lot of research, and there's more and more information that they are having to deal with. And so, infographics is one of the ways that I have learned to teach them to do that. So let's talk a little bit about infographics and what they are. So, infographics are basically a representation of information or data in a visual format. It breaks down more complicated pieces of research and data into things that the brain can easily absorb. 65% of our population is visual, 90% of what your brain takes in is visual, and also visuals increase learning and retention by 400%. And so, our kids and just the general population also have much shorter attention spans than they used to. And so, infographics make for a quick and easy way to continue to impact your kids' learning. So, let's talk about some of the purposes of infographics. There are about 10 different purposes. I mostly focus on three with my students. And these are the most common. So the first one is to show a process. You can use visuals paired with some information to represent a process that might be otherwise complicated. You can also use it to organize information, such as from a research project. Or if you were having the kids write down facts about a particular animal or habitat or something like that, you can have them organize it in a visual format like an infographic. Here is another one that is who is affected by the US government shutdown. That's some pretty complicated information. And so, an infographic, this one, it still has quite a few words on it, but it helps you categorize the information visually and sort through it. The other most common purpose of infographics is to compare and contrast. And if you know anything about Marzano's high yield strategies of instruction, compare and contrast is one of those 9 strategies. When we talk about how things are similar and different, kids retain the information longer. And so compare and contrast infographics work perfectly. Here's one that is comparing. It's not necessarily contrasting, but it has several different columns and all of the descriptions about each of those businesses across the top. Is still compare and contrast. So, one of the other high yield strategies from Marzano, besides compare and contrast, is the non linguistic interpretations. And so I feel like infographics really fit that category. You are representing complicated information in a visual way that their brains can understand. So let's look at some ways that you could use infographics in your classroom. So in science, they often read the textbook and they answer questions at the end. Sometimes teachers will have them outline or summarize a chapter. And so you could do that, but do it in an infographic form to where they have to pick out the most important information. You could have them represent a process of some sort from the textbook, but represent it in an infographic. You could have them outline or summarize the chapter in an infographic. Another way that you could use infographics in your classroom would be to compare and contrast characters from a story, or 2 stories to each other, or novels, or compare the book to the movie. There are all different kinds of things that English teachers have you compare and contrast, and we draw Venn diagrams and T-charts and all kinds of things. And so the skills are still the same, but have them do it in an infographic. In history, you could compare different forms of government. You could compare different countries or policies or even different parties. You could also have them create a timeline. This is another purpose of infographics, is to show progression or show a timeline. And so in history, that would be a very easy thing to do. You can also do it in literature if you're sequencing a story. or even in science, if you are talking about the development of the periodic table and you study the famous scientists who contributed to that. So in math, you might think, oh, well, we can't do this in math, but you actually can. Anything that has a process or characteristics that you want to put into different categories to help people remember, you can use an infographic for. And so, of course, that fits into math. So any kind of a process or properties, even the order of operations, you could create an infographic for that. So I started infographics about 2 years ago, and I have found that my kids who are not necessarily verbal linguistic kids, who don't necessarily write essays very well, do fantastic with infographics because they are pulling out the most important pieces, the key information, and then they are representing that in a visual way. And so if they're not verbal linguistic, they might be visual instead. So here is my information. If you have any questions or if you want to make comments on how you might use infographics in your classroom. So I hope I've given you something to think about today, and maybe next time we'll talk about the different software that I use to create the infographics. Thanks for watching.